And let me just say, the discovery, not new, except to me, is how filthy Love's Labor's Lost really is. It is riddled with sexual innuendo. As a matter of fact, so much that we have got a code on our little sheets now. We just pay SI for sexual innuendo. Average 3 per page, it seems to me. And I think we aren't even working that hard. We get a little tired sometimes. Like, really? Can it be? It's like, how boring. Yet another one. Yet another SI coming down the pike. So I said this to the education department yesterday. They looked at me very strangely, like, really? It's a sexually charged play? And they were worried about some things in Invalid. And I thought, oh boy. So, I think we're going to be able to get away with things, maybe. I don't know. At least I think their age rec is right for Love's Labor's Lost. I guess that's 13 or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, I'm teasing you all with that in sort of the SI kind of way to say we're not going to talk about any of that today. We'll talk about it all next week. For the boring part right now is to just kind of talk about some context and just a little bit of production history about it. As you know, I continue to love to know what these objects are and sort of like their place in the world, and without making too much, autobiographical speculation about, was he a young man, a middle-aged, and oh my God, an affair went bad, or whatever it is, without making too much. It's so hard not to make that kind of speculation about an artist, but trying very hard just to enter these things and see what they are. And that's what, Sean and I are just kind of going in there looking, like, what are they saying? It's like, what are they, not even like, what does it mean? It's like, what are they actually saying? So, we're going to get there. So, am I in charge of this, or you're in charge of this? Excellent. Okay. All right. It's also going to be the Marjorie Garber Day, who says some pretty wonderful things about Love's Labor's Lost, again, in her book Shakespeare After All, which I highly recommend as sort of the general text. But I think this is a really true statement. I think this play really does read hard, and for some reason, just when we were like reading these out loud, we're like, oh, that's funny. I have no idea why that's funny, but it's funny. And it's just because they flipped 2 words around, and they were just like having some verbal foreplay, as it were, and it was just funny. But, how do you explain a joke? And the minute you explain a joke, that's the end of the joke, right? So we're trying not to be too analytical about it, but there you have it. So I have a couple of big categories I want to sort of talk about in that way to try to situate the play itself. Kind of like, when we did Measure for Measure, and we talked about morality plays, and we talked about Puritans and Catholics, and with Julius Caesar, we talked about sort of the rise and interest in Elizabethan times of sort of Roman history as Rome. Elizabeth is to Rome as whatever is to, Greece. America is to Greece. We had sort of had that sort of SAT test thing going on. And there's some interesting things that are happening, I think, that would, as we kind of march through today, will begin to drop in for an interesting understanding of Love's Labor's and how it might have come about and what it might or might not be addressing. But I think some of the things that we're going to talk about today actually help make some sense. Shauna, I say that particularly to you and me, because we were not sure we were going to make sense of this, but I think maybe we might have come up with a couple of things. So we got the big old R going. Renaissance. Rebirth. French for rebirth. Most of us know this whole big movement that's happening beginning in Italy and spreading throughout Europe. And it may be because England is sort of this, island thing, and independent, and the Anglo-Saxon whatever issue that's going on when, William conquered, defeats Harold at Hastings in 1066 or whatever is going on. But it does take a while for sort of the movement in some ways to get to England. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But in some ways, people have kind of collapsed it as being sort of the Elizabethan period. So that's sort of the Renaissance flowering period of England. And what happens is a switch from sort of high Middle Ages into sort of this next period is that we're focusing on recovering and studying Greek and Latin literary, historical, and oratorical texts. Already you can probably begin, if you know your Love's Labor's a little bit, to see where some of this interest is coming. It's not about science, math, and philosophy, which is really where a lot of the Middle Ages lands itself, in terms, again, of looking at Latin and Greek texts, that they were focusing on those kinds of things. But that become a whole new section of the library gets opened up. It's like, ooh, a discovery, you know, you got to make your name for yourself. Hey, I'm going to read some text some Cicero. Nobody looked at Cicero, you know. So you've got that kind of coming in. It begins in Italy because that's where a lot of the texts really are, and then, you know, as I said, begins to spread a little bit. So you can kind of begin to see this sort of just change of focus. You know, these are big general statements, but I just kind of thought it was so striking, this particular focus of literary, historical, and oratorical, because of the nature of Love's Labour's Lost. So, English Renaissance in particular, 1520 to 1620-ish, they're sort of calling it, right? The sort of end of this period, and you guys can have these PowerPoints. So, you know, whatever else you want to scribble down. If you're doing your grocery list, that's really great too. So don't, not to worry. I get the multitasking need here. So I was just saying we can do it. You know, you can have these too. Later than Italy, as I said. And, you know, the dominant art forms in Italy, of course, is really the visual arts, isn't it? I mean, when we think about the Renaissance in Italy, you think Michelangelo, and you think Da Vinci, and you think sculpture, and you think of linear and perspective painting coming into being, right? Not so much in England, although there's the architecture of Inigo Jones later in this period that comes into being. And so it's a major-minor piece, visual architecture as art. But really, as we probably know, it's literature and music that really takes hold in England. And obviously we're thinking about sort of, you know, those early operas, William Byrd and Lilly and obviously Shakespeare, Spencer, and the whole gang that emerge. What's interesting to sort of think about, again, this notion of the isolation of England and sort of its own kind of stubborn nature, and maybe I can say that because I'm 7/8 from the British Isles. Sort of stubborn natures, like you do it the way it was done before, until proven otherwise, and this sort of invasion piece. But there's an interesting kind of healthy tension, it seems to me, between sort of the holding on to sort of the Gothic, and in some way, not only just by architecture, but by philosophy and by religion, and sort of like the way things should be, and sort of this re-emergence or rediscovery of sort of Greek philosophy in sort of a pagan way. And one of the things, one of the essays was talking about this morning was sort of, you know, if you think about Midsummer, you know, you got this sort of, it's kind of interesting when you think about some of these early plays that have this sort of mixture to them, even going so far as Winter's Tale at the end. You know, it's an interesting sort of blend of things that Shakespeare seems to pick on, and pick up on, and I think that that's kind of an interesting in our play as well, because there is this strange, for lack of a better word, kind of anachronism or sort of consistency about the world. It's like, where is this coming from? But I think in some ways it's sort of idiosyncratic English. During this period, and we've talked a lot about mixing of styles and genres with Shakespeare, and how actually all things, all bets are off in a way in terms of making things be about one thing and sticking to one thing, that they are their own whole and they have an integrity to them per play. And some of the pieces and parts happen to be this sort of tension and this mixture of things, I think.